Welcome to the second session of the course on leadership in the School of Intercultural Studies. A couple of years ago I was in the Philippines during the summer working with Wycliffe Bible translators, and I had an opportunity to talk to one of the Philippine national leaders who was working in his own tribal group in the island of Mindanao. In our conversation we were talking about the nature of indigenous leadership and the fact that so oftentimes the missionaries who'd been working with him did not place confidence in the local leaders. At the same time, he was struggling with the issue of how, as a Christian leader in his community, he could be free of the kinds of constraints that grew out of their traditional culture and out of the traditional belief system. In the book Transforming Culture, which we are reading for this evening, one of the things that you discover here is the idea of being imprisoned in the prison of disobedience, and looking at how we might become free from those particular prisons. The pastor that I was talking about was struggling with this very issue. How is it that the Word of God could free him from the constraints of his local community and yet allow him to work effectively in it? We're unfortunately not able to take the time to work through all of the details of transforming culture. It's a very complex subject and there's much to be learned in it. We've got a whole other course on that subject. But as an introduction to the leadership class, I wanted you to concentrate on the chapters dealing with family authority and with community authority, because they're just so important in terms of helping us understand, first of all, our own prison of disobedience, and secondly, how we can become liberated through the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ from those prisons. As we get into our class session tonight, one of the things that we'll do is involve you with discussion with others of our students in the whole issue of how our cultures constrain us, how there are different styles of family authority and leadership authority, and how as we look at those authority issues that we can be transformed to become more what the Lord Jesus Christ would want us to be in this regard. One of the wonders of the gospel is that we have been redeemed from the reign of darkness, the dominion of darkness, into the kingdom of the Son he loves. Find that in Colossians. And Paul calls us in Romans chapter 12, 1 and 2 to be transformed by the renewing of our minds in Christ. What we're going to be looking at in this course is how we can be transformed leaders, effective within a social context, and yet able to be like Christ, to be transformed by the renewing of our minds and by the renewing of our relationships in Him. Okay, our first lecture for this evening is the lecture discussion number 2 in your syllabus on page 19. The title of the lecture is Family Structures and Authority in Society. The reading for tonight is in this book, Transforming Culture. I hope you got through the assigned reading that you were given, and particularly that you concentrated on chapters 6 and 7, which we'll be discussing in this evening's class. Before I get into the class discussion of the material in this book, I'd like to just lecture for a few minutes on some key concepts that I think will be helpful to you as we look at family authority and as we discuss this issue in a comparative cross-cultural perspective. In the outline that you have, point A there talks about the difference between authoritarian and egalitarian households. The authoritarian household is one in which you have an emphasis on equality and commonality. I'm sorry, hierarchy and difference. Read the wrong thing, okay? Hierarchy and difference. The egalitarian, in contrast, is one that emphasizes equality and commonality. Okay, as you think about these particular concepts, this at least opens the door for the discussion that I want to have and the concepts that I want to outline for you. Positional authoritarian is a way of discussing the type of authority and the type of relationships that you have in an authoritarian family. The word positional we can speak of in terms of role behavior. In every family you have roles, so a positional family emphasizes specific kinds of role behavior. Usually the roles are sharply defined and they're hierarchical. What do I mean by that? You have the clear distinction between elder brother and younger brother, clear distinction between father and mother. Father is in authority over mother, elder brother is in authority over younger brother. The positional authoritarian family is one in which every member in it has some kind of structured relationship with other members. And usually there is a structure of authority that follows based upon role and upon expectations or rules that are defined in relationship to those particular role structures. A positional authoritarian family will emphasize the differences between male and female, and there will be a strict division of labor so that women do not do men's work and men do not do women's work. And younger children are given boys' work or girls' work. They don't mix those particular roles. In addition to the role definition for work, there's also positional focused correction. In other words, when you're going to correct a child, you emphasize the role and the rules that are operating in the social situation. For example, I remember when I was growing up, my parents would say to me, "You're acting like a girl." Well, I was being corrected because I was behaving in an inappropriate role behavior. One of my sisters was saying, "You're a tomboy. What's the matter with you? Why don't you act like a girl? You're acting like a tomboy." So you use those kind of phrases and you correct people on the basis of certain kinds of roles and certain kinds of rules with regard to behavior that put them in a position. And they're corrected because they're not conforming to the positional kind of behavior that is expected. The personal egalitarian family is the second alternative. And in that one, we'll make this one and the egalitarian the second, you have an emphasis on, instead of role and rules, you have an emphasis on relationship and in those relationships you have flexibility rather than rules. Now let me try to emphasize this or explain this in a little different way. In a personal egalitarian family, there is a relationship between the members. And let's say that I have a daughter. She's my oldest child. And I have a good relationship with that daughter. Well, my daughter likes to be with me. And so I work on men's things. But that doesn't bother me. I take my daughter along and teach her how to do men's things. My sister came one day and found us in a house in Ohio that we owned. And my daughter was down there soldering pipe with me. She was only 11 years old. My sister was flabbergasted. You know, here's Jennifer. She knows how to do this. And, you know, I would never imagine doing this kind of thing. But the relationship was the important thing. She wanted to be with me. She liked to do things with me. And in terms of role definition and how she should behave, we had a flexible attitude about it so that she could do whatever she wanted to do. And she learned to do the work that we would ordinarily call men's work. Now, that kind of a situation is one where the behavior of the child is really negotiated on the basis of the child's personality and interest. For example, my son likes to cook, and my daughter doesn't like much to cook. My wife is an outstanding cook. My son takes more after my wife in terms of his interest than he does after me. Now, we all have very good relationships. My son has learned to do things that are men's things. You know, he learned to build things because he worked with me as well. But he's also learned in working with his mother that he's learned how to do things in the kitchen. And both of our children, male and female, have learned to do all kinds of housework because I do housework, and so does my wife do housework. And so our relationships and our flexibility are what we use to define how we work in a social setting and in a social structure. Now, that particular kind of family we call personal egalitarian, as opposed to the positional authoritarian. I want you to know that I don't think either one of those types is the best type of family. I don't think either one of those types is God-given. Both of those types are ways that people have of working out their relationships to accomplish the collective kind of cooperation that's necessary for family living together. Now, in knowing that those two things exist, it helps us as we begin to look at families cross-culturally to understand how they're structured differently and what their expectations are. If we go to point B in the outline, horizontal bigenerational versus vertical multigenerational households, this introduces another dimension in terms of our cross-cultural understanding of family. Horizontal households are those in which there are only two generations, okay? And usually the key relationship is the husband-wife relationship. I'll just abbreviate HW. The focus is on the marriage, the husband and wife. Sometimes you have single parent, okay? Many households in America today are single-parent households. But they are horizontal type household structures in the sense that they're only two generational, and the strength of the relationship is usually in the spouse focus. Of course, in a one-parent household, you have the parent-child relationship. But usually the parent is working in that context, and so the children develop a parallel relationship and a mutual responsibility for one another. And the key emphasis here is in the horizontal direction in terms of the power of relationships. Now, the vertical household, or the multi-generational, I use this word vertical first, but I'm shifting to multi-generational because I think that it communicates more accurately. Usually people think of vertical as being authoritarian, and I'm only using it in terms of generations and structure. So don't look at it as an authority, although you may have authoritarian dimensions to it. But a vertical household is one in which you have 3 generations. And you have, or more, you can have 4 generations. Usually 4 is about the maximum that you can have. And in these households, the emphasis is not upon husband and wife, the emphasis is upon parent and child. So that it could be a household in which the mother and daughter relationship is in focus. It could be a household in which the father and son relationship is in focus. Or it could be a household in which it's parent and children of either sex in focus. Different parts of the world do it differently. If you were to go to West Africa, you'd find many households in West Africa that are multi-generational, in which the father-son relationship is the critical relationship. It's the one in focus. If you were to go to the Navajo Indians or the Hopi Indians in Arizona, you'd find vertical households, 3 or 4 generations, in which the mother-daughter relationship is in focus, and that's the most important one. If you were to go to Sabah in Borneo and go to some of the households and families there, you'd find that it's parent-child relationship in some of those societies where there are 3 generational households, but it doesn't matter which parent, male or female, it doesn't matter which child, male or female, the married children and their grandchildren stay in the same household. So it can be vertical in any of those ways, and they structure their family relationships on the basis of that type of vertical orientation. Yes, Henry?
They all live in one household.
They may live in one household, or they may live in a household complex, several houses clustered together in the same land area. In the island of Yap where I lived, we had families who lived in different households, but they were right across the street from each other. The eldest brother on one side of the street, the younger brother on the other side, and the youngest brother just on the other side of the elder brother's house, all clustered together, with the authority relationship clearly being elder brothers 1, 2, 3. So it can be the same house, or it can be a cluster of houses. Suriname, the Alcan, would have a cluster of houses, not living in the same house itself, but the mother's house, the daughter's right close by, their house is very close to their mother's house, and they would all share a common cooking area where they would sit and talk together and work together as a team.
Does there have to be that proximity, or can a family be structured that way with distance?
Families can structure with distance. In other words, it's really up to the family how they define their relationship in space. Space is not the key factor, although it's one that often comes into play. In the case study that I read to you in our devotions, the prodigal son story is one where the father and his old son, I mean, this is not a young kid. He's probably married and has friends and family. is living with his father, and they share a common household. So you have the parable of the prodigal son is a vertical situation, because the young man goes off and he spends all his money, and he has all kinds of sexual immorality and wastes his money on all these things, where the elder brother stayed home and he's been responsible. So you have the vertical household illustrated in the parable of the prodigal son, sharing the same space there. But you don't have to. It can be a dispersed vertical family unit if you want. Bob?
Multi-generational family usually a stronger family unit or tighter, more controlling?
It can be, but they're different. For example, you can have an egalitarian multifamily unit. The Alcan in Suriname are an egalitarian vertical family unit, whereas the Yapese were vertical and authoritarian. And so there was much more control. But again, it depends on the issue of control and what they want to control. How every family exercises control is different from one group to the next. I would say this, that the issue of authority is a grid issue, not a group issue. This is a group issue. Does the family emphasize group, or does it emphasize the small nuclear family, individuals going and setting up their own households? These are the weak group, strong group variables. The other that I put up for you before, the authoritarian, here you have strong grid and weak grid in terms of the model that we've been looking at in our text. This would be... I reversed them, didn't I? Yeah. Yes. Okay. On the other page, I did it exactly the other way. So you have a sense of what we're working with here in terms of the grid and group framework that I described for you last week. Okay, do you have any further questions about this just introduction to the variations in family? It's important to realize that this can produce many different combinations. In this particular book, I haven't discussed the varied combinations, but you can have 3 different combinations of this vertical family that I've just described to you. Father-focused vertical family, mother-focused vertical family, or parent-focused vertical family. Here you can have the husband-wife focus, or a mother focus, or you can have a father focus group that are horizontal in their relationships. Sometimes you also can have horizontal families where there is a sibling focus. With some Indians that I worked with in Brazil, they emphasized the brother relationship, not the father relationship, and they had their own individual households, but they tended to group together as brothers. But they were just 2-generational, never more. They kept 2-generational structure, and they emphasized the horizontal relationship to brothers. So the way that people can mix this up and create complicated family structures is wonderful. It's a gift of the creativity of God to us in allowing us to form our relationships in such a way that we can work. Now, one of the reasons why I'm spending significant time on family authority and talking about leadership is because family authority has such a profound role in terms of how people relate to one another. In a study that one of my grad students did in my class last semester, she demonstrated that in their mission team in East Africa, they had team members who come from America and team members who are East Africans trying to work together. And as they looked at the tensions that were operating within the team relationships, the researcher in this case, one of your colleagues as a student here, discovered that the primary conflict arose out of the different family values of the members of the team. The American members of the team, who were horizontal in their family structure and tended to be flexible and egalitarian in their family relationships, were bringing that over into their leadership team relationships. And they were demanding that the team respond to them on the basis of these very strong and powerful family values. Their colleagues, their East African colleagues, were coming from vertical families with authoritarian structures, and they had all of these expectations of their family relationships in the communities around them. They were expected to be at family funerals. They were expected to be at family gatherings. They were expected to contribute to family needs. And they were constantly being pulled out of the team relationships to deal with their family relationships. And the interesting thing was that they tended to be critical of one another working in the team because neither understood the demands that the family structure were placing on the others and the fact that their values were creating these conflicting tensions and pulls for them and dividing them as they attempted to work together in a team relationship. So I start with family tonight because I want you to know that your family values will have profound impact on how you deal with other people. They will shape how you act as a leader in the situation where you're going to work. The kind of family structure that you feel is best for your family and that you try to implement with your wife and husband and with your children will be the kind of family structure that you will attempt to impose upon your relationships in working with nationals. And that doesn't matter whether you're a single missionary or whether you're a married couple, because in either case, you carry that family baggage with you. Now, I think for singles, it's easier to give it up. But you can't give it up completely, because if you grew up in a household where you had a certain set of values that were inculcated in you and for 18 to 20 years of your life, that was the system by which you lived your life. To change that when you go somewhere else is extremely difficult and creates tremendous tension for you. It creates deep inner conflicts. It brings out emotions and feelings that you can't really analyze and understand. And you behave toward people in ways that are not really biblical. They're emotional. They grow out of your deep sense of who you are and who you become in your family. So I begin with family in a discussion of leadership because you, as a person who is working with others, must understand how much you are a product of your family and how much that family shapes you and structures you and creates expectations for you in your relationships with others. Now, what I told you last week is that we're all in our own prisons of disobedience. And part of that prison is our family. The family that raised us. You know, I had a discussion with my deans today. And in that discussion, I was talking about my failings as a leader. We'd done a little evaluation, and I had this sheet of things that said, here are my weak points. And it was fascinating. As I looked at my weak points, I could go back and tell them the times when my father disciplined me in such a way to produce this particular kind of response. One of the weaknesses I have is I don't reward people enough for the work that they do. Well, part of that is because I grew up in a family where my father said, if you did a good job, you don't need to be rewarded. You should know that you did a good job, and that is a reward enough, that you knew it. So I kind of internalized that and grew up with that. And so that's how I react now. And so I figure, well, if Sue Harris did a good job, that's enough. She knows she did a good job. She doesn't need me to pat her on the back. Maybe she does. Maybe she grew up in a family where you always were affirmed if you did things. And if you didn't get affirmed, you felt something was missing. And I don't know that. I just react like my father taught me. And so what happens is that we then have these misunderstandings with one another. And we fail in our relationships with others because we don't know what their needs are. And we are not able then to respond to them in a way that would be appropriate. So as you think about who you are, try to understand this in terms of recognizing that others will come from different family backgrounds that really prepare them with different values. Values that in themselves are their prison of disobedience. And without the redemptive work of Christ and the freeing, liberating power of the Holy Spirit in our lives, we'll be chained to those values and not be able to build the bond of unity in the body of Christ to become what He wants us to be. Now, with that in mind and with that preparation, I want to go to a discussion of some of the value differences that we see here. If you have your books, open them to page 115, and we'll begin to talk about the table that you have here on page 115. This table kind of summarizes the case studies, and I want to talk about it for a while. Until I get you thinking about it and discussing this, we're not going to really know whether you understand what's being said here or not. So the first question I have for you is question A in your outline in the text. What are the key distinctions between the values of the faculty of Christian College and the values of village families in Yap? All right, the faculty in Christian College are up here in this Be Bureaucratic section in your book, and the people in Yap are in the other section. So you've got two places there. This table should help summarize. Okay, you read the book, probably don't remember it, but take a look at the table. What do you see as you read this? And as you were thinking about what I described as the family values of Christian College faculty and the family values of Yap, where do you see them different? Where did you see some of the key conflicts in them?
There's There's a lot more autonomy, I think, in the Christian college within your little sphere than you would have in terms of making decisions, in terms of controlling what you're doing, what your little niche is, as opposed to in YAP, where you surrender a lot of that autonomy to those above and to the group as a whole.
Okay, I think that's excellent. The Christian college family definitely has a lot of autonomy of its members, whereas the Yappies surrender that. It's a very good term. They surrender it both to the authority and to the group. Excellent insight. Okay? What other differences do you see between Christian college and YAP?
Individuality.
Okay.
And group.
Okay, the strong difference in the emphasis on the individual as opposed to the group. The Yappies emphasizes?
Yeah, but still in the group, yeah?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but in the bureaucratic things is that focus on individuality more.
Okay, that's right. The bureaucratic family focuses on the individual, and the individual is in an authority structure, whereas the YAP really does emphasize belonging to the group. The group is so important to Yappies people. We talked about that last week. And in the family, that's very true. The solidarity of the family is something that they are very much concerned about. What other things do you see different, the YAP and Christian college family?
Maybe the YAP is the age, yeah? Age, but the bureaucratic is the academic things.
Okay. Age, okay? That's very important. The Yappies, some of the rest of you, tell me what the age distinctions are in YAP. How do the Yappies use age, Ray?
Well, the older men don't associate very much with the younger men
Okay.
because of the social distinctions. And it seems like there's a level every time of your peer group. And if Murray's 50 years old and I'm 25, we don't associate. We don't even really talk. We can hang around the same place, but we don't really talk.
Okay.
It's rude. Or
How would that be, why is that uncomfortable to us as Americans?
I think to me, what I've read about some of these cultures and how sometimes the sons didn't even talk to the fathers because that was considered, that wasn't respectful. And if I didn't talk to my father, that was, I would consider that, very bad. But I think we have this thing that everybody's created equal, and that's how we associate. In other cultures, not everybody's created equal, or at their specific age are equal to other people.
Okay, good. So that strong age differentiation then creates an inequality that they accept as natural and appropriate. Whereas we, with our value on equality, feel that fathers should be able to talk to sons. And in fact, we cultivate that. We cultivate that working together kind of partnership. If fathers don't spend time fishing with their boys in America, they're thought to be bad fathers. Whereas in YAP, if a father went fishing with his teenage son, this teenage son is very unhappy because he would much rather be fishing with his peers. Because with his father, he's just got to be quiet and work. Whereas with his peers, he can laugh, he can joke, he can have a good time. And we would talk about father and son having a good time. But fathers and sons really can't have a good time on YAP because that respect relationship is so powerful. It's just so important to show respect that to joke would be to invite the possibility of disagreement and conflict. And so the respect relationship is much more important to them than the joking relationship, whereas we feel that father and son should be able to joke. Okay? I'm sorry I've forgotten your name.
Andy.
Andy, okay.
Have you ever spoken to someone from a culture like that where respect is more important, and have you asked their opinion about it? Like, for example, the son. Do they like that, or is a longing for a relationship with a father innate, or is that something that's mainly cultivated in American culture?
Well, first of all, you concluded that they don't have a relationship with their father, which is false. Okay? They do have a relationship with their father, in fact, a very deep relationship with their father. But it's not one in which they can joke. It's not one in which they can sit around and make small talk together. It has a different structure and a different nature to it. So that is a false conclusion that we usually draw when we see a family like that. The other thing is I had 4 Yappies kids live in my home, for some of them for 6, 7 years. And the one who had the most problems, the one who had the greatest tension, the greatest conflict, was the one whose father died when he was young. And he said, "My father abandoned me. He left me. There's no one to care for me. And he would get drunk, and all he could talk about when he was drunk was the fact that his father had died and left him all alone. And that the one who had been in submission to his father all his life, the boy, and I've had 3 girls, but the boy, very fine relationship with his father. He's now back on Yap. He's living with his father in that kind of compound complex. Very, very warm and caring relationship, but reflecting the kind of distance that I've described in terms of their communication. But clearly a very, very deep relationship. The traumatized boy was not the one who was under the authority of his father, but the one who had no authority over him and who felt that he'd been abandoned, that he was not cared for. You know, I tried to provide a relationship, a friendship, really. He lived with me for 7 years. But in that process, he took on me an authority role. He treated me in the same way that he would have his father in Yap. And while we worked together, we sometimes would talk together while we worked. He was learning American customs and ways. He still wanted to keep me in that authoritarian position because that made him feel secure, made him feel that someone was caring and providing for him in that way. So there's a tremendous variety of ways in which people live and work with one another. And it's important to realize that fathers in Yap, just like fathers in America, can be dysfunctional, terrible fathers. They can abuse their children. They can hurt their children. They can misuse them in very significant ways. We'll get to that. That's a very important part of our discussion. But their feelings of failure will come in different areas. They won't see the failing of the father in the same way that we do. Okay, let's go to the second one. B, what are the key distinctions between Yapese family authority and Dani family authority? Okay, in looking at this one, we're contrasting the corporate group now with the individualist down on the bottom. What do you see as the differences there? Okay, Bob?
Children can quickly become equals with the parents in doing the labor skills since there's no high roles. Where in the Yapi, when the children grow up and they reach adolescence, they immediately will no longer follow the parents around and learn what they are doing. That inequality immediately comes into effect.
Okay, that's really key. The children's role with their parents is so dramatically different in the two societies. In the Yap society, they grow into the hierarchy, they keep separate, and they learn the skills of adults, but they do it in quite a different way. The Dani, the kids are co-workers, and they very rapidly become competitors, and sometimes very quickly better than their fathers in hunting, better than their mothers in gardening work. And the parents look at that and smile. The Yapese parents, they would smile at their kids' competence and their capabilities, and they'd be pleased with that. But they would never compete with them one-on-one. It would always be done in a very different kind of social setting. Okay, anything else between the Yap and the Dani that you saw as differences?
It's that where the father picks, or the father picks the mate for the daughter or his son, and that's so foreign to us. But it's like when you pointed out that it's where Jacob had to submit to his father-in-law, and that is so foreign to me.
Okay.
But that's a major difference.
Okay, a key difference. The Yapese do not choose spouses for their children. Neither do we. But the Dani do. Part of the problem is that there aren't many around, and you have to negotiate to get a daughter. In the village that I was in, there were only 86 people, and there was another village 5 days downriver with another 105. There were probably 2 eligible girls in this village of 86 people. They were about 12 years old, and there were 3 16-year-old boys. So whether you get a wife or not depends upon your father's ability to be able to negotiate with the father of the girls to see if they'll give up one of their daughters to you. And there are 3 fathers competing for 2 girls. So it was a pretty tight demographic situation. It's not like you had a lot of choices. That whole situation probably is very similar to what Jacob was in. There weren't a whole lot of eligible girls around. And so when he went off to Laban's house, there were 2, and Laban decided he should have them both, whether he wanted them or not. So that the role of parents in that situation is quite different from the kind of role that we would expect in our own society. Okay, let's move quickly to the distinction between the Dani family and the Alcon family. See in your outline there. That's the 2 over here now in the high group section. Dani is, I'm sorry, not Dani. Did I say Dani and Alcon? Oh, I did. Okay, Dani and Alcon are the two in the bottom. Let's take a look at the Dani and the Alcon. What are the differences between those two groups? Okay, the patriarchal and the matriarchal formation, and that's, the emphasis on men in the one and women on the other is a difference, okay? It's not a grid group difference, but it's a kinship difference, okay? Can you see the difference between low group and high group in these two social settings? Sue?
There's one family estate for all the sisters in the Alcon higher group versus the Dani make their own households and move away.
Okay, the Dani make their own households and move away, whereas the Alcons stay together in the extended family relationships. The women are then a part of an extended family complex. That's crucial. Now, the Dani would do that with brothers, but if you didn't like it, you could leave. You could just move off and go somewhere else. Whereas with the Alcon, a woman would stay with her mother. It's very, very difficult for a woman to leave her mother's place, leave her mother's village and her families. The husbands move, remember the Alcon situation? A man could have several wives, and he would travel from one wife to another, different place in the village or a different place in the river. He would go up and down the river. Any other things that you see different between the Dani and Alcon?
Parents maintain an authority in the Alcon long after the Dani parents have since given that up.
Okay, that's right. The parents maintain an authority long after the Dani parents have given it up. And it's really a group authority. It's the importance of the group among the Alcon and the submission of people to the group. It's a very critical difference between the two social groups. All right. Just quickly, if you were to describe the family you grew up in, how would you describe it? What would you say? Dixon? What would you say?
Probably an individualist.
An individualist family? Okay. All right. How about you, Henry?
I grew up in Argentina, and Polish father and a Spanish mom, and I think pretty much like here, sort of flexible, egalitarian. We could. Dad is a figurehead, but he's not the one who will impose everything. Okay. So it's sort of a negotiable.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Good. How about you, Murray?
My mom was very flexible. My father, we had more of a vertical relationship and more of kind of a high grid.
Okay.
There's definite role differences, and there's definite ways I am still to treat him.
Okay.
When I'm still in his house, I'm still under his roof and his rules. And
okay.
My roles, his roles.
Okay, sure. Okay. All right, you think about this. I don't have time to go around and ask all of you, but think about the kind of family structure you had and the dimensions of it. Don't put them in a box. That's not what I want you to do this for. What I want you to do is think about what the variables are. Because families are complex situations, and every family is a little different. No two are exactly alike. And so you have to look at it and begin to understand what it was that shaped you and how those forces were at work in your life. Okay, let's flip over to page 20 and to page 129 in your book. I want to ask you the question, A, how do the typical sins of the parents among the Dani differ from the typical sins of the parents among the Yapese? Okay, at this point we're comparing now the Dani box and the Yapese box, the diagonal here. How do the typical sins differ? If you look at the sins in the Dani parents, the sins in the Yapese parent, what do you see as a contrast between them? Again, it's important that you think about these things because this is really where the rubber hits the road. Okay? If you don't understand how people define their structure and then how they sin in that structure, you really don't know how to bring God's word to them in that context. Okay, what are you seeing here? Right?
Well, in the Dani group, right off the bat, it says the parents are creating an amoral atmosphere.
Okay.
And that right there is going to lead the kids into what they think is right, everything for me.
See, in that individualist setting where things can be flexible and everything can be negotiable, then morality can be negotiable too. And right and wrong can be negotiable. And the flexibility can produce an amoral type of social setting. And there are some societies where that dominates. With the Dani, it was clearly the case. They said, when we asked them, why did you commit immorality with your brother's wife? He says, well, I wanted to. And he said, well, then why did you fight? And he said, well, my brother was mad. And we said, well, how was the fight? He said, well, I tried to kill him and he tried to kill me. Well, why didn't you? And he said, well, we thought about it a little bit and we decided it wouldn't be so good. Brothers probably shouldn't kill each other. So we stopped. And then we said, well, what did you decide then? Well, we decided that we wouldn't do that anymore, that we wouldn't sleep with each other's wives, because we really didn't want to fight and we didn't want to kill each other. And if we got caught, we'd probably have to kill each other. And so that's why we wouldn't do it. Now, you see, the whole thing is negotiated. The whole sense of morality about immorality in relationship with one's brother's wife is not something that they had a rule for. It was really something that she was there. It was a convenient opportunity. I'll do it. Oh, there comes my brother. Now I'm in trouble. Okay, what shall I do? And then you fight. So that kind of amorality is a crucial part of the Dani situation. If you remember, Jacob behaved in the same way. Laban behaved the same way. And it helps you to see that when you have that individualism and that flexibility. Remember the flexibility with Jacob? Jacob was a cook in the kitchen, and Esau was what? Hunter in the field. Right? Flexible sex roles. Okay? Flexible in terms of lying, you know. Jacob did a lot of lying to get his way. So you see that individual type of family and how it works in that setting. Okay, what kind of sins do you have for the Yapese? Craig?
Well, I see a conditional love, a relationship between the father and the son. It's not a consistent love, but it's conditional on the obedience relationship.
Okay, conditional on obedience. That's how the elder brother treated the younger brother in the story of the prodigal son. Conditional love. If he was a good boy, he deserved to be brought into his father's house. But he was a bad boy, so we don't bring him back. Okay, conditional love. Good. Anything else? Stephen?
Yeah, between Yap and Dani, within the Dani culture, the fathers seem to use their son-in-laws and daughters to achieve their interests.
Okay.
Whereas among the Yapese, the elders take advantage of the younger ones, using them to achieve their own interest, family interests.
Okay, good. You picked it up. The elders in the Yapese situation will use the younger ones to achieve their own political and social interest. Very, very common sin in that society. To use your children to forward your own political agenda and your own political end. The children do the same thing. They will use their fathers for their own political ends, and they do it because they can get away with it. In Yapese society, they don't punish children, they punish the fathers. So when a son does something that's bad, they haul his father under the carpet, and the father has to take the punishment. And the sons, some of the sons will just constantly let their fathers do that. Well, the sons will do the same. Fathers sometimes will do the same thing to their sons. They will misuse them, using them for their own family interest. Because property is so important, you see. And accumulating property for status in their society is such a key objective. They will use their children for labor. They will use them to one of the things that they do is they tell all the kids, you have to contribute so many $100 to a big party I'm going to have. And the kids have been out working and making wages for their government. Doesn't matter. They have to give the money to their father. And the father will have a great big party and spend it all. And the kids' money will be gone. And some men will use this consistently, and they'll drain their sons and daughters who are working for employment of all their resources to spend it on big political events for their families. So that kind of hierarchy and tight family structure can be used. The fathers can use their children for their own domestic interest. Well, I've focused on the fathers and the parents in these things, but I want you to examine these because this is critical to understanding the nature of sin in different family groups. Look at the sin, for example, in the bureaucratic group. In this one, to use discipline without love is a common failing. Common thing that parents make mistakes on. Separation and independence usually produces isolation and loneliness. You've got an awful lot of lonely people in America that have been raised in bureaucratic families where they were always taught to be alone and do their own thing. Then it produces this isolation and loneliness. Go down the list, check them out. You can see that these kinds of things are going to produce different sins in the parents because the structuring of the society is different, but they all sin. And that's the key thing. They all sin. Now, if you go back to the prodigal son and examine the case study of the prodigal son, the prodigal son was a C corporate like Yap social setting, okay, in which property was used to control children, in which love was conditional based upon obedience and submissiveness. Elders humiliate, use the younger for their corporate family interest. Those are the common sins. If you look at the elder brother, this fits him pretty well. Love was conditional. He wanted to use the property to control his profligate brother. He would be very happy to keep the younger son humiliated. He didn't want him to be restored, didn't want him to have a new coat, didn't want him to have a party. And respect and avoidance were more important than tenderness and compassion for the elder brother. He did not want the younger brother incorporated in the household. He did not want to extend tenderness and compassion. These were the very typical sins of people in this kind of a social setting. Now, the wonder of the story is that the father rejected all of these social values, and the father showed the compassion of the Father in heaven, the loving Father. I would argue, as you look at each one of these, that a loving father in any one of the four quadrants will be very different from the father who falls into sin. And while he has to express that love differently because the social rules are different, in other words, because my father doesn't control my property, he really can't interact with me in the same way that the father of the prodigal son did. I mean, my father has no connection at all to my property interest. I won't receive an inheritance from him until he dies, and then I won't need it. You know? What can my father give me that I don't already have? So you see, my father has no property control over me at all. He has no structured relationship like we find in this family structure in the New Testament. But my father had relationships with me in the type of family structure that we had, and he, like any other father, sinned at times, and at times he was like the Father in heaven in responding to us. So it's crucial to understand that the Father's work for us in heaven is not like anything we can define here on earth. It will call us to transformation. And if we look at this form of society or that form of society, this form of family or that form of family, as somehow being the one that is right for us, we're going to miss the point. The only plan that is right for us is to be transformed by the renewing of our minds in Christ. And in that transformation, understand what it means to be a loving father in a C corporate environment, or a loving father in a B bureaucratic environment, or a loving father in an A individualist environment, or a loving father in a D collectivist environment. Each one of those are different. Each one has different pressures, and each one has different requirements upon the people who are participating within them. Okay. We'll go to just a couple of questions if we have time here. Suppose you were a missionary discipling leaders in a C corporate African culture. What do you anticipate would be your blind spots in relationship to counseling missionaries on the matter of corporate authority or leadership? If you were working in East Africa, where you have strong corporate family structures, what would be your blind spots? What trouble would you have in counseling? Okay, Bob.
You would tell the children who just became Christians to not worry about what their family thinks.
Okay.
You know, come along, make the decision. You're your own person. Choose Christ. Get involved in the church.
Okay.
And the father and the family has control over them still.
Okay. Counseling to them to break out of their family, to forget the family, get into the church, get involved in the church, forget your family relations. Excellent. That's a very common thing that people do. Advise them to forget their family ties. And it produces terrible tensions in the life of the believer, terrible chaos in the family, and of course it will keep them from winning their family to the Lord. Because when they've broken totally the respect patterns and the obedience patterns within the family structure, they have no witness. And so effectively we destroy their witness. Good. Okay. Can you think of something else that you might do? Excellent, Bob.
I've seen on the other end where missionaries have come and sought to reach the big man in the compound or in the village, not being aware that that man may be using Christianity or whatever for his best interest, not for the necessary best interests of his family. You win him, you win the whole family.
Now that's not what I'm saying. All I'm asking you here is to concentrate on the counseling. How are you as a counselor going to goof because of your values? Well, that's a different question. We'll talk about when we get to community authority next. Okay? Keep it focused on your values. How would you counsel somebody incorrectly because your value would come into play? Okay, Tenor?
Counseling in the area of marriage, according to the corporate group, parents reject certain marriages from a wrong family or wrong village. And my tendency would be to say, well, if she's a Christian and she's the right one for you, go ahead and marry her without thinking that perhaps she belongs to the wrong family in the eyes of the boy's parents. I don't know if I'm understanding their position correct.
Sure. That's a good point. Your automatic reaction would be to counsel them, go ahead, it's okay. Where you might end up counseling them to go ahead, but to go ahead by working through a process with each of their families to get their families to come to an agreement. It would take much longer. It would be a process in which trying to show each family respect and maybe waiting for a while to get it done. But it still may be the right marriage. But the error that we would make is counseling them to ignore their family, ignore their position and their obligations, and just do it our way, because we're individualists, and that's okay with us. Good insight. Okay? Anybody else see? Well, let's go to the next one. What would be your blind spots with your African brother with regard to sin? Where would he see you sinning, as opposed to you seeing him sinning? You're going to pick on different sins with each other. Sue?
Probably see us not taking care of our parents.
Okay, he would see us not taking care of our parents. Would see that we really are not accountable as children in relationship to our parents. Okay, good. Excellent. Spending more money on ourselves instead of our family? Okay, good. Good.
In a high group, you would be considered self-centered. Whereas they share more with their group, we would be self-centered.
Okay, absolutely. You're absolutely right. That we tend to focus on our own needs and are separate from others, and we are often accused of being self-centered in those relationships. All right, where would we see them sinning? What are some of the kinds of things we would pick up that they wouldn't see? Maybe one that Murray mentioned. Using the young people for their own political ends, their own objectives. You know, that's one that they wouldn't see. And that's what I think you were hitting there. Am I right?
Yeah, well, alienating people and making a decision, not consulting everybody beneath them, a spiritual decision that's going to affect them.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
In essence, you use them or you alienate them in that.
One thing that I want to try to help you to think about here now is that in every social situation, there are people who are poor Christians and poor fathers. In other words, let's say that we're talking about people who are really trying hard to be good Christians, to follow the Word of God. You know, not the guys that are jerks. Not the missionary that you know is a misfit and we should send back home, or not the national that you know is corrupt and just using his Christian faith to get things for himself. But national and missionary who really want to do God's will and who want to do God's work. And as they work with each other, they begin to see the flaws in their partners in these relationships and see how this other person's got this beam in his eye that he can't see. And of course, or we might say moat, but Craig.
Well, I would see a father who tries to control his son, avoid him, or demands respect from his son, and doesn't develop the relationship. I would see that me as a sin, because I covet my relationship with my father is very intimate, and so I would see there was a necessary evil, or I would see there's a wrong in him not to develop that relationship as intimacy and very vulnerable.
Okay, that's excellent, and I think that's a common thing that we identify right away. I know in Yap, I was troubled by the fact that sons didn't have what I saw as an intimate relationship with fathers. Now, part of it was that I really didn't know the structure and the nature of the intimacy. And I didn't know how that would happen and how that would interplay. I was only there for 2 years. And obviously you don't grow up with a father and son in that 2-year time period, so you don't know how their relationship grows and changes. And you make judgments then on the basis of how yours worked and what happened in your family as you look at their family. So it's a very common thing to do. Now that doesn't mean that they couldn't build better quality relationships between fathers and sons. And this is something that I think is very important to realize as we look at this whole process, that the quality of relationship is one that can always be improved in Christ. In other words, as Christ comes in and transforms us, and He makes us anew, then the nature of the relationship we have with our children, the nature of the relationship our children have to us, the nature of our relationship husband and wife, all those things are enriched and enhanced by the Spirit of God working in us and through us. But we need to understand our blindness. You see, when we're working with people across cultures, we need to recognize that they are blind and we are blind in certain very significant dimensions of our lives. And we will not see the differences that are working with one another. Okay, with that, I think I'm going to close. I've asked you here that you should explore for individualists in the southern Philippines the same questions. You'll have to do that on your own. We don't have time to do it now. But this is crucial to understanding how you're going to be able to work with people in other cultures. You've got to recognize yourself as being blind, and you've got to recognize that they're blind as well. Both of you stand in need of biblical transformation. And if we can learn to respect one another and love one another, then we can share with one another the blindnesses that we see in each other. But without that respect, it becomes criticism, and it becomes rejection. And we reject the nationals, they reject us. The next thing you know, missionary goes home discouraged, national defeated, doesn't want to work, and we can't build our team relationships together. Well, let's take a break. Well, discussion lecture 3, Community Authority and Cultural Bias. Page 21 in your syllabus. This particular chapter, as you're familiar now having read it, is on the concepts for understanding community authority. As in talking about family, understanding structure and authority in community also is complex, highly variable, and there are some theoretical concepts that can be helpful and useful to us in understanding this process. On your outline, I've, starting with their item A, authority and power, I'd like to define 2 different kinds of authority and then some variables that we will see in relationship to power authority. The first type of authority that we've listed there is skill authority. Skill authority is a type of authority in which you control information or technology. I have skill authority tonight because I have information. Information on the cross-cultural study of leadership. And so because of the fact that I have mastered this information, invested a good part of my life in studying it and writing about it, I have skill authority in controlling that information and controlling the technology of research, which you're learning in this particular course. I then gain authority, and you sign up and pay money for a class like this so that you can acquire that information and gain some of that skill so that you will have that same kind of skill authority. Every society has the potential for skill authority. Not all societies use it, but every society has that potential. It can be traditionally defined. In the island of Yap, there were people who were skilled traditional craftsmen. They knew how to build canoes. They knew how to build houses. They knew how to make magic for fishing or for war. And those particular information and the particular technology associated with it gave them skill authority. So skill authority is one that is an important part of leadership. When you go out and your objective is to make disciples, one of the reasons you can do that is because you have been discipled. You have information and you know how to make disciples, so you have skill authority that is related to that process. Now, a second kind of authority that we'll look at is power authority. we think about power authority, we're talking about the right to control people and resources. Okay, it's important to understand that power always relates to the issue of control. And in this situation, the subject controlled are human resources or material resources of some kind or another. Now, when it comes to leadership, you've got to have either skill authority or power authority to be a leader. You cannot lead without having some basis for authority that you work with. We can talk about spiritual authority, but spiritual authority really is a skill authority because it comes through being discipled in the Lord Jesus Christ. It comes through studying the Word of God. It comes through becoming a follower of the Lord Jesus Christ in such a way that that skill authority of being His disciple then is conferred and you can pass it on. Power authority relates to a more secular kind of relationships, but it also can be relationships within a church as well and in Christian groups, because we also control people and resources. One of the things that you'll find if you're a missionary is that you have usually more resources than the people that you work with. And in having those resources, you have control over them, you have power authority. So it's crucial to understand that anytime you have any kind of resource at all or access to resources, you have supporters back home who can provide financial support for a particular project that's really important to you, that gives you power authority. Now, power authority is usually defined as the legitimate right to control people. Not the illegitimate right, but the legitimate right. It means that it's something that you have and it's held legally as opposed to illegally. If I came in here with a gun and I made you all empty your pockets and took your money, I would have power over you, but it's not legitimate. And because it's not legitimate, we won't call it authority. You see, we'll call it just power. Sheer raw power, the power with a gun to take from you what you have. But it's not authority because you don't want to give me that. And it's not something that you view as legitimate or something that is reasonable within the social context in which you work. So the use of authority always refers to the fact that what we're doing is something that is legitimate in our relationship to others. Okay, as we think about power authority further, I've indicated in the outline there are three different types. The first type is independent. Okay, independent authority is one in which a person controls people or resources without any limitation from others. In other words, you as a person have control, and it's unrestricted. For example, I have a wallet, okay? And in my wallet I have some money. Okay, now this money I have independent control over. You don't have any authority to take it from me, no legitimate reason to do so. You don't have authority to use it. No one else does. You know, this is the money that I have. I have the legitimate authority to use that money. It's independent of anyone else. Now, if my wife were to come in and say, Sherwood, can you give me some money? I can take out this money and I can hand it to her and say, sure, it's yours. Now, in doing that and giving her the money, I have granted her power over what I have independent power over. In other words, this is mine, I have it, I control it, no one else controls it. I could say, I'm sorry, I just have a little bit left, you'll have to get your own. So she would take the ATM card and go get her own, out of the same account, of course. Actually, you see, I don't have independent authority over the account. The account is something that we hold mutually together, and each of us has the card to access the account. I do have independent authority over my wallet. Interestingly enough, she has independent authority over her wallet. I do not go into my wife's purse and take out her wallet and take money out of it. I always ask. I say, you have money. She always asks me. And if I say, go get it out of my wallet, she'll say, well, I just would rather you get it. Now, it's just a mutual respect, a custom that we have, that our wallets are a private, personal place. But what that really says is that we have independent, personal control, unrestricted over what's in our wallet. But we don't have independent, unrestricted control over what is in our bank account. That we have joint access to, we have joint control, and either of us can take money out of it. All right, that's just a simple illustration, but I think it helps you to understand it. When you go into a social context, the Board of Trustees at Biola University have independent, unrestricted control over everything that happens at Biola. They are the owners of the university. And they really can make a decision to sell the whole place if they want to. Now, they're a group, and so it would probably be pretty difficult to get the group to the point where they wanted to make that decision. But if they decided to close us down tomorrow, they have independent authority and could do it. They are, in fact, the autonomous owners of the university in this context. Allocated authority is the second type. Okay, the word allocated means to give to someone else, but I use that as opposed to granting to make this distinction. I want to say that when you grant power, you do it personally. In other words, I take out my wallet again, and I say to Sue, Sue, it's all yours, all I have. Okay? All right? Who wants to go for ice cream? Now, I've granted her power over the money that's in my wallet. I've given it to her, and I said, do what you want with it. So I've done this. I've granted power. But let's do it a different way. You give that back to me. I'll put it away. Okay? All of you, give me all of your money. That's allocating power. Okay? If I ask you all to give me all of your money, and I tell you that I'm going to use this for ministry outreach to the starving in Somalia, and you trust me, and you're committed to helping the people that are starving in Somalia, and so you empty your wallets for that project and say, we'll do it, because we have a passion and we want to help those people. Now, what you have effectively done is you have given money to me. You've entrusted it to me because you believe that I will use it for what you've said that what I said I was going to use it for. I saw this happen in a Sunday morning church service last weekend in Philadelphia. Pastor got up in front and he said to the people, he said, I've researched this whole thing with the disaster in Florida, and he said, I've concluded that the very best way that we can help the people down there is to give money to the Lutheran diocese that is there. They have promised they will take none of it for administrative expenses, and they will use it all to help those who are in need in this disaster-stricken area. And so he said, if you want to give to help, write your check out to the church, put on it, Florida Project, and we'll be sure that money gets down there to the Lutheran diocese and that it will be used to help the people there that are in need. Now, everyone who writes out a check, everyone who pulls the dollar out of their wallet, puts it into the offering plate to give it for the need in Florida, is allocating authority over their money to not only the church, but to the Lutheran diocese in Florida, and that diocese is going to use it for the project that they said they would. Now, somewhere along the way, some corrupt official could misuse it. I mean, corruption is everywhere, and it always happens. But the point here is that allocating authority is when a group of people make decisions to give their resources or their control to somebody else, and those people can use it for the good that they have deemed appropriate together. Okay, so we've got then independent authority, we've got allocated authority, and we've got this granting authority. I didn't put granting on the outline, but I think it's an important concept to understand, because the granting is really just one person to another, as opposed to allocating is a group of people working together, giving power to some central authority. Now, the last one is delegating authority. And that's a term that you're familiar with, so it's not really a difficult thing for you to understand. Effectively, what we do is the money is sent to Florida, and the Lutheran diocese has people that are working in Florida down there who are authorized, have delegated authority to spend the money for particular needs. And so what they do is they say, well, here are a whole community in which all of these trees have been fallen. Why don't we buy 10 chainsaws and we'll give them to people working in the community so they can clear all of these broken down trees from their driveways and their streets and from their yards, and that'll help get the cleanup done. And so we've allocated the money to the Lutheran diocese. They delegate responsibility to people within it to spend it for what they deem as appropriate needs in that process. Delegating then is passing authority downward to others and giving them the freedom to use it in a responsible way to accomplish their particular objectives. Okay, as you think about these things, they're subtle distinctions, but as we come to comparing societies, they become important. Because in some societies, these are utilized in different ways. In some societies, they're not used at all. And it's crucial to understand this and understand how societies are structured in terms of these power relationships. Okay, the next thing that I want to look at in our outline under B is the relationship between authority and community. In thinking about the structuring of authority and community, the first point that I've noted on the outline is the issue of fragmentation and individualism. To fragment, what does that mean? It means to break up into separate parts. If a society is fragmented, usually it has a focus on independent power and on granted power. Now, why would that be so? Think about that for a minute. What's happening that keeps the system fragmented? People hold the power in their own hands and they don't give it up. And if they do give it up, they just give it to other individuals. And so as a consequence, power is used in a social situation where people keep tight hold on their own independent power and don't give it to others. Or if they do give it, they grant it, and they do it reciprocally. In a situation that is fragmented, you also often have skill authority. Okay? But the skill authority is technical in orientation. Now, why do I say technical? Because it's based upon certain kinds of technical skills that one can hold independently or one can grant to others. The difference, of course, in another social setting would be skill authority being more traditional than technical. In other words, having a history, a social history. But here you don't have a social history with skill. The real focus is on the technical dimensions of it. Okay. The emphasis then in the fragmented society is individual. Holding independent power, granting power individually to others, focusing on technical skill authority. And delegation does occur if you have high grid. But granted power or delegated power in a high grid situation usually is not done to groups, it's done to individuals within a hierarchy. And so you have a structure in which people have delegated power, but they feel very alone and isolated in that framework. Okay, we'll see that as we go on further and talk a little bit about the other type of authority. The fragmented individual can be contrasted with what I call the coordinated consensus. Now, consensus is not spelled right in your outline. It should be C-O-N-S-E-N-S-U-S. The C-E-N-S-U-S is census like the U.S. Census. So consensus is the word that we want to have there. Coordination and consensus. I'll flip this over. I think it'll be easier to follow if I move it on to the next page. If we look at coordination, one of the key things of coordination is allocated power. Now, if you notice a difference between the fragmented power is that it's independent and granted. When people start to allocate power, they do it as a group. Therefore, there's some group accountability and group responsibility. They give authority to a few in their group or to one person who's over their group, and the group then holds that person accountable because the group has made a commitment and given as a group. And so when the money is not used in the way it should be, then the group gets angry, not just an individual, because it's a collective arrangement. So allocated power is inevitably connected with coordination or group activity. Now, in this kind of situation, allocated power then can also be delegated. It follows from the allocation process. It can be delegated to other segments within the group. And you can also have skill authority. But it's very often traditional. Again, what do I mean by traditional? Well, being a longshoreman in Portland, Oregon, has been passed down from father to son for several generations. It's a traditional union. To get into it, you got to have a relative in it. And to keep the skill going, you learned it from your father. You were brought into the union. They put you into it. It was passed on. Same thing happened in Europe with the whole idea of apprenticeship. Apprenticeship was fitting in and learning as a student, studying for a long time, picking up a traditional skill. The emphasis here then is on the social relationship as well as on the skill. In other words, it's the combination of the skill and the traditional society that brings them together to produce the coordinated structure. Whereas if skill is merely technical, there's no significant social connection to it. Individuals can have it. Any individual can pick it up. It's not passed on in a social framework. It's like in this class, none of you had a relationship before you came here. It's strictly a technical arrangement. You're coming to study here for a particular goal and objective you have as a person. And when you leave, you probably not see one another again. It isn't something that you connect to in some kind of a traditional way. There may be one or two of you here that have a tradition of somebody having gone to Biola before you. That's a family member or so on. But that's rather unusual and rare. So coordination really is based upon social relationships, and power fits into it, and particularly allocated power. Now, if we go back and look at the one we saw just a moment ago, just in summing up, the fragmented system is one in which the individual is in focus. Independent power and granted power, technical skill authority are the pattern. When we look at the coordination and the consensus, consensus is necessary because of allocation. In other words, it's making decisions together, agreeing as a group. This is what we're going to do, giving somebody authority to get it done. That becomes a part of the high group focus in terms of authority. Okay. You have a question, Bob?
So coordination is not independent and granted? Is there part of that in there?
In coordination, you really don't have independent authority. The group really keeps anyone from getting independent authority. Now, it could be possible that someone gains independent power if it's high grid as well. In other words, if you have a real hierarchy and there's somebody at the top, but if there's strong group, people at the top can't get away with it. You know, fascinating thing in the village, the island of Yap, the social situation there is high grid and high group. And there are individual chiefs who try to get away with being independent in their power. But the people, if they do too much of it, they nail them. They used to kill them if they did it. And that's how they took care of them. Now what they will do is they'll just ostracize them. They'll eliminate them from power, isolate them, won't let them have any power at all, and keep them from being ineffective. So they've got to really be sensitive to the fact that their power is allocated first. Then it can be delegated. But if they fail to recognize the allocation process, they're gone. They just cannot be effective. The Americans came in there in 1946 after World War II, and one man posed to be the high chief. And for a while, he got away with it. The Americans said, oh, this guy's a big deal, and they did everything through him. But within about 3 years, the people figured out how to get rid of him. And they did, and he's been an isolate, social isolate ever since. I knew him as an old man at 70 years old, and he was just the most pitiful person, and being isolated and having no power, and being socially scorned, and a pitiful person to see as he tried to somehow still make himself out as an important person. But because he chose to try to act independently, they just completely ruined him as far as his political career was concerned. So understanding the power of group in terms of the use of power relationships is important if we're going to work cross-culturally. Okay, next we're going to go to the book. Page 143 will be helpful because here we have a social table like the one that we looked at before. And one of the things that I want to do is just get you to think for just a few minutes about some of the contrasts in community power relationships. In the last lecture, we were looking at family power relationships, and now we're trying to understand something about community power relationships. You'll see in the tables here that I've used these terms now. Each kind of power is placed in the table to express something of the difference in power relationships, and of course the text spells it out much more carefully. But if you can remember what you read, and if the table will help to refresh your mind, what do you see as you look at this table as the contrast between the power structure here at Biola and the Yapese power structure? What are some of the key distinctions that you pick up here? Sue? Speak loud.
One of the biggest ones for me is like the board of trustees, like Christian College, can make decisions and we don't have to agree with it. And so we have kind of a sense of we don't have any decision-making power at all. Whereas in Yapese, again, the authority is allocated, so we all are part of that decision that's made by the people at top.
Okay, all right. Good observation. The power of the board or the power of the administration at Biola is something that students always feel helpless to do anything about. You know, oh, it's just Metzger. You know, all the problems lie in Metzger. And so, you know, you look at that and you say, yeah, we're powerless. There's nothing we can do about it. And of course, when you go through the registration line and somebody says, well, those are the rules, I'm sorry. It's just the way it is. Or you go to an office and people say, well, those are the rules. That's the way it is. I'm sorry. People in the system feel powerless. In a communal, allocated power system, people feel they have power. They don't feel powerless because they know that they can sanction the leaders, that there is this sense of getting together your people, mobilizing your forces, speaking your piece, and they'd better hear it. And the Yapese tell stories of this. They go through these long stories. For example, the village I lived in, they said that the women got so mad at the men that they refused to cook for them. They got together and didn't cook for the whole village. And the men said they got so hungry that they went on to other villages and begged, and then they finally sailed off and went to another island where they could stay for a while until their wives got over their anger. And, you know, so the power of the group in terms of making decisions is something that we don't really quite understand because we never act that collectively. We don't act with that kind of collective agency. Okay, anything else you see? Contrasting Biola and Yap.
Relationship with people is taken seriously. It is people, the community, Yapese community is more of people oriented, while the school focuses more on accomplishing its task.
Okay, all right. The difference between a task focus and a person focus?
Not giving much attention to relationship with people. And when the outsiders see that, they tend to think, well, there's no Christianity here.
Okay.
Because we are more conscious or concerned about our task.
Okay.
Whereas the community takes seriously people.
Okay.
They want to keep a relationship.
Do you see a difference between your study here and your study at home in Nigeria?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I mean, in terms of these people
these issues,
yeah. the tasks were coming from, I went to a missionary school. So,
Okay.
And it's very similar to what is here, but still the nationals, the teachers, we are more of people, people-oriented community. Take seriously our relationship rather than the studies, the task.
Okay.
We know we achieve or we are going to do what we have been trained for anyway, but then the relationship is taken very seriously.
Okay.
Because when we get there to the field, see, we are going to meet each other. And so if the relationship is not cordial while in school, then what are we going to do outside when we get to the field?
Okay.
So we take relationship very seriously.
Yeah, I think you've hit on something that's very, very important. It's the whole issue of relationship within the authority structure. One of our graduates, Del Chin-Chen, is working in Malawi, and my wife tells the story. Well, Del wrote back a letter and said he did a survey of his students asking what the students expected of the teacher in Malawi. And they expected that the teacher would visit them if they were sick. They expected that the teacher would act as a parent toward them and correct them if they were disobedient. They expected that the teacher would just pay a call on them socially from time to time to let them know that they were interested in that person. Well, you know, if we told faculty they had to do that at Biola, there'd be a rebellion, you know. What do you mean, you know? That's in loco parentis. You know, we don't do that anymore. Here, we're just here to do our teaching. You know, that's our responsibility, our teaching and our research. So there are very different expectations as we go from one culture to another or one social setting or another in terms of the kind of relationships you'd have between teachers and students. So you're right. Here the task is much more in focus. And the relationship, it's not that we don't like relationships, but we wouldn't go to that extent. They don't have that priority. That's a very good observation and important to understand. Okay, any other observations here in contrasting those two? Right.
As far as the skill authority is concerned, for the Christian college or for Biola, you could choose whatever you want to do. You can pick and choose. So you have a technical skill. And in YAP, you're pretty much relegated to the role of what your father did. He's going to teach you, or your mother did, and things like that. So they have the more traditional skill authority.
Okay. Absolutely right. And we then assume that skills that we have can be transmitted in the same way that they were transmitted to us with the same degree of social freedom, when perhaps the whole nature of skill transmission there is handled very differently. And that again creates a difference in terms of how people handle authority and what it means in a community. Good. Good insight. Anything else that you see? Craig.
Responsibilities in Christian college like this are given to a specific training, a skill that you've sought after. When YAPs, it's given more for inheritance or who you are in the community. It's given a certain authority by your person.
Okay. If I were a teacher like a YAPs is a teacher, you'd be my student. You'd be fixed here at Biola until I was about ready to die. And I would teach you a little bit of new stuff every year, but never teach you all that I know. I'd keep waiting because I want you to be indebted to me and know that I haven't given you the best part yet. And I'm only going to give it to you when I'm just about ready to die. And at that point, I'm not worried anymore about you stealing my power. I'll give you the last part, but I'll only give it to my best student. All the rest of you that are hanging on here, and didn't treat me as well as Craig did, Craig's going to get it all. That's the way they do it. Now, usually in a situation like that, a man will have only 2 or 3 students at the most, because, and they'll have to live in his same community and have to stick with him for a long period of time and be around there when he's ready to die and catch that last amount of knowledge. And Yappies would sometimes say, oh, he died so fast we didn't get it, But he got sick and suddenly he was gone and he couldn't talk and we just lost it, the knowledge was gone. Well, we don't do it here that way. You pay your dollars and I tell you everything I know in one semester, and then you can go from there and carry on with what you want to do. So our situation is task-oriented. Okay, let's go on to the next question here. What are the key contrasts between the Javanese and the Dene with regard to values and the structure of leadership and authority in those communities? Javanese is like the Yappies And you remember I had a Javanese case study in this chapter looking at community, the case of the Javanese pastor. If we contrast, there were two cases in this chapter, the case study of the Dani airstrip and the case study of the Javanese pastor. So if you remember those cases, in thinking about them, what kind of contrast do you see in terms of their values with regard to leadership and authority?
Javanese wanted to have control of the pastor, and the other guys were pretty egalitarian in their leadership, so they kind of share. You described them almost as cheerleaders, I recall.
Yeah.
And so there's no authority that would control the tasks that were demanded of them, and so things didn't get done in a very efficient fashion.
Yeah. The Dani chief as a cheerleader doesn't really have control, does he? I mean, the cheerleaders that you've known, how effective have they been in controlling the crowd? No, they really don't have control over the crowd. But if they're charismatic, they can get the crowd to go with them, right? You know, if they're really good, they can, and if the game is really good. If the game is not really good, even the best cheerleader is kind of stuck, you know. Well, that's the way the Dani work. That's the way leadership works with the Dani. It's not one. But you hit it right on the head when you said the Javanese pastor maintains very tight control. And that's a critical distinction between the two. Okay.
So the Javanese is independent authority and the Dani is allocated? Or?
Well, no, actually, the Javanese pastor has allocated authority. But once he has it, he controls it completely in terms of being delegated. In other words, they give it to him, they join the group, it's a group that he brings together with his leadership, but the issue is delegation. He didn't want to delegate any more than he felt was appropriate. And so he kept as much for himself as been allocated to him, and delegated only when he felt it was right, and only as much as he felt should be passed on. So he kept very tight control over what had been allocated to him. I think that the nature of the community was such that it really was allocated authority because the people joined voluntarily. They joined the church because they became believers. They joined because they liked his leadership. And there were other Javanese churches they could choose from, but they really liked his leadership, so they allocated authority to him.
Is it not that the people gave the authority or allocated the authority to the Japanese pastor because they see there's another authority that gives the power or authority to the pastor, like from God?
Yes. Oh yes, because of their faith, and they saw the pastor as the one who had been anointed to provide spiritual leadership, then that spiritual leadership was an important part of his social authority as well. But he used his social authority in a different way than someone else might, in the sense of holding on to it tightly and delegating it only as he felt the people were appropriate for. It's one of those things where each of us in spiritual leadership positions, we first of all must recognize that we're under the authority of the Lord Jesus Christ. And I think that my Javanese pastor friend recognized that. He saw himself clearly as under the authority of Christ and could not do what Christ would command him not to do. But at the same time, he felt a responsibility for his flock and held on to certain controls and did it as he felt was appropriate in terms of delegating. Now, the independent power would be one where he can do what he wants, no matter what the people think. And I don't really think that the Javanese pastor could have done that. In other words, if he had... There are some situations where people can take power away from a group. And I think Murray described that earlier, that it would be a situation that was so pressured that he would lose... I mean, he could take it independently and run with it himself. I don't think this man did that. In fact, he's a good pastor. A very good pastor. Murray.
The people underneath the Javanese pastor, did they chafe at all under that strong authority? Or was it just some missionaries who were bothered by the fact that he wasn't delegating?
From the best of understanding that I have, they did not chafe under it.
But the Dani would. The Dani would fight it.
Yeah. The Dani wouldn't take it. You know, the Dani would do their own thing. They would just do what they wanted to do, and it would be something that they didn't pay any attention to. In other words, if people didn't want to follow, they didn't follow with the Dani. They just did their own thing and ran their own way, whatever they pleased. Now, they respected a man if he were a charismatic leader, and that's, you know, they would follow him because of his charisma, but not because he had authority. In other words, he didn't really have authority over them.
So the authority in that Danish leader is granted by the people.
Exactly.
Granting authority.
That's right.
Yeah.
So when the Dani chief gets up at 4 o'clock in the morning and he says, well, let's have a feast today. And I'm lying in my hammock and I say, man, I was planning to go down the river and work on my canoe. I don't want to have a feast today. So I yell out, no way, I'm going down river and work on my canoe. And he says, well, what about the rest of you? And so somebody else says, yeah, I want to have a feast today. And then we start arguing. And we have a big argument in the village at 4 o'clock in the morning about whether we should have a feast or not. And I'll sit there and listen, and the people are saying, Sherwood, why are you such a jerk? You know, we want to have a feast today. You can wait and work on your canoe tomorrow. And so after all this conversation goes on, then I might decide, well, okay, I'll do it today. And so I'll grumble and complain, but I'll come along. But it's only because of the discussion. And the other people in the village saying, come on, you know, we haven't had a feast for a couple of weeks. Let's do it. And so then I come along and I'm willing to do it. But I've seen the feast when one guy says, hey, I'm not going to do it. I've got other plans and I'm going with them. And he does. And then they have the feast in the afternoon, and the people are gathered all around, and he says, they say, oh, it's so bad that Itzello isn't here today. Why didn't he come? Well, he had to do this. Oh, we have bad talk like that. It's just no fun, you know. It'd be much better if everybody was here. And so they'll grumble and complain, but he didn't show up, and they can't do anything about it. He'll show up maybe the next morning or late that night, and they'll say, well, you sure did spoil our feast. What do you mean I wasn't even here? Well, we missed you. And, you know, they'll have this conversation, but put a little social pressure on him, but there's no way to coerce him. You know, he has the freedom to do what he wants.
What's the purpose to have a chief in Danny's group since he doesn't have much power? What is the purpose to have a chief?
They like the fact that he mobilizes them, you know, that he gets them organized. Because without somebody to say, let's do it, they never would do it. They never would work together.
But they may not, they don't necessarily listen to him.
Don't necessarily listen, that's right. Yeah. And you see, that's why they're still a small community. They're not well organized. They're not capable of doing major projects, because if you're going to do major projects, you've got to have regular workers. You've got to have people who will commit to working together over a longer period of time. You've got to have some structure to make it go. When we get to the last book in the course, the Nursing Father on Moses, that's Moses' problem. You know, the people won't work together. He can't get them to cooperate. Can't get them to do things the way God wants them to do. And ultimately, he comes up with an organization that's got hierarchy in it, because without it, everybody's going his own way and doing his own thing. So it'll be interesting when we get to it and see how Moses struggled with those same issues.
Maybe our group is like the Danish, the team leader, just like the Danish leader.
That's right. That's right. Your research working groups will be just like the Dani. You know, each of you will go your own way and do your own thing, and you won't want to follow the leader. You'll probably find that your research project is exactly like the Dani. I hope that you can work it out, and you can maybe reach some consensus decision making, or even give somebody authority. That would be neat. Great. Okay. That was a good discussion. I thank you for it. Let's go on and talk about mission and national conflicts, and try to wrap up our discussion on this subject. In the book, there were two case studies that we looked at on page 148. You have the case study of the Javanese pastor and the Bible translation co-workers. And I entitled this case study, Corporate versus Bureaucratic Decisions, saying that basically the Javanese situation was one where they came from a corporate group orientation, whereas the mission was working from a bureaucratic orientation. Now, if you can go back and review that case, how did the structure play a key role in the conflict between these two? How did the structural differences, the Javanese corporate structure and the mission bureaucratic structure, produce tension and conflict?
Task orientation, person orientation.
Okay, task and person was one of the conflicts. What did the mission, the Bible translation organization, what task did they want to get done?
Finish Bible translation.
Yeah, and they had a schedule, right? And they were trying to get it done in a particular time frame. Okay. Now, in that focus, what was the conflict with the Javanese mother tongue translator?
So they want to get as many labor people as they can, but the Javanese, he is person oriented, so he really pay attention to whom should be taking over this responsibility.
Okay, excellent. Whom and what else? Okay, Stephen?
Well, who, if I still recall it, or remember what I read, who and the capability, are they capable of handling it?
Exactly.
Maybe they don't know, they haven't, they're not advanced yet to that level. So until he sees their maturity or their knowledge has increased in that respect, then he could delegate or allow them to participate in the translation.
Exactly. Their maturity, their knowledge, their ability to work at a level that would be corporately appropriate was the key thing. Sue?
We see Bible translation as a technical skill, a task, whereas he was seeing a Bible translator as a position,
okay.
a person.
Okay, good. Excellent. The Bible translator is a person in relationship with other persons, okay? What other complications did that bring into the situation then?
Whether they were qualified to have that delegated authority, if they were mature enough and had gone through that kind of apprenticeship.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas we would train a bureaucratic system, I train somebody for a very technical skill.
Okay.
Whereas he's discipling people to become a leader in the church who has this particular task.
Excellent, excellent. You hit it right on the head. Discipling people to become leaders in the church who then can do this particular task. And discipling takes time. If you understand the situation this man was in, the one man that the mission team wanted to give work to was a believer of just 1 year, a new baby Christian. And they were encouraging them to give this man who had technical skills, English, Suriname, Javanese, and Dutch. He could speak all of those languages, so he had the technical skills. The worst language, by the way, was Suriname Javanese, because he was pretty acculturated as the Suriname Javanese. So the pastor just didn't have confidence. And the mission team again said, well, give more work to your junior pastoral staff, and you do the translation. Oh, that's fine, great. Then you got guys out here that are good in terms of the pastoral relationship. But again, from his point of view, they hadn't been discipled long enough. They really hadn't developed maturity. The people didn't have the confidence in them like they had in the senior pastor. So one of the team said, well, this Javanese pastor is a compulsive person who wants to control everything. Probably that was part of it as well. In other words, personality is the key part of it. But a social situation reinforces a personality or rejects a personality. In other words, you know as well as I do that certain people just socially won't be allowed to do certain jobs in our culture because they can't do it in the way we want it to be done. Whereas other people are given those jobs because they do it in the way that we expect it to be done. And for example, I'm in the position of provost. Okay, why am I there? Because I'm extremely task-oriented. I can do things on time. I can keep things going in terms of the flow of the particular bureaucratic and time expectations that the system likes. So that's why I'm there. If you had a people person who was great at talking with people all the time and who spent all kinds of time relating to people, they'd be upset with me and I wouldn't have my job very long. You have to be able to do what is needed in terms of meeting the objectives of the agenda that the social situation has for you. So this pastor fit. In other words, he was one who met the corporate expectations, who did it in a way that the corporate group expected as appropriate, and they rewarded him for it and praised him for it and said, he's the right kind of leader, the one we want. He didn't work so well in the bureaucracy because the bureaucracy was time-oriented, task-oriented, production-oriented. We want to get the task done in a particular time frame. Okay, let's go on to the next case. Technically qualified versus corporately qualified. This case study is the one that we have on page 150, and it's one that deals with the Alcon and the Bible Translation Organization. How is this one different from the Javanese case? What's the difference between the Alcon and the Javanese in terms of the grid group framework? Both are high group, but what's the difference in terms of grid?
Javanese high grid.
Javanese are high grid and the Alcon? Low grid. Okay. So low grid means?
Little specialization.
Little specialization and a focus on group. That's right. The consensus in the group. Little specialization and focus on consensus. Now, the Javanese pastor had all kinds of authority and control. How did the Alcon people feel about authority and control? Sue?
Consensus egalitarian.
Consensus egalitarian, yeah. The group looked at each other, evaluated each other. You remember what the Alcon pastor said? How do we choose leaders? We watch them for a long time. And as we watch them, we see if they work for the Lord. Now, what is working for the Lord? It's also working for the group. It's working for the church. And we said, well, how long? Oh, 10 years. Okay. So what they're doing is they're watching these young men as they grow up and work in the church, and they watch them over a long period of time. And when they show themselves faithful, they show themselves responsible, they show themselves always available, then they gradually start giving them more responsibility. And in that process of watching them grow and watching them develop and becoming more and more faithful, they then incorporate them into the leadership group. Now, leadership is not an individual thing, it's a group thing. In other words, it's a collection of leaders. It's a group of people who are the elders, the older men and the older women in the church. This was a fascinating little church. It was a Pentecostal church, and I shouldn't say little, it had 250 people. The building was big enough to hold 200, and they filled it, packed it out every Sunday night. They had all kinds of ministries going on. They had ministries to the children, ministries to the sick, ministries to those who are in hospitals, ministries to people in terms of evangelism. They had a big chart of all these things. And there were people in charge of those ministries, and they were all people that had demonstrated themselves responsible over a period of time so that they could be given accountability. Ultimately, those people were allowed to participate up front in terms of the situation in the church. You couldn't be up front unless you demonstrated years of faithfulness. Now, if you think about what the mission was asking in this situation, they wanted to take two young guys who were in their 20s, early 20s, who were bilingual, able to speak the Alcon language, able to speak the Dutch language, I should say trilingual, and able to speak English. Okay? And they wanted to use them as Bible translators, and then they asked the church to provide some financial support to help them. Okay. Now, you remember the story, don't you? How much pay did the pastors get? Not 1 cent. Okay? So here we're asking the church now to pay two young 20-year-olds to do Bible translation work when the pastors who work full-time don't get any money. And the associates and all those others are working for the Lord. This seemed just totally incomprehensible to these people, how we could ask such a thing. Well, of course, we didn't even know this information until we asked all these questions. I mean, this was really one of the best case studies that I've found in my mission experience of how just basic research, a little bit of research, asking some questions, could save people a lot of trouble and a lot of misunderstanding. I mean, we did 1 2-hour interview, and all of this came out in an interview. And, you know, the team had been working together for several years, but they'd never thought to do this interviews and ask these simple questions. Now, I'm not being critical of these men, because they're just like most of us who go out and work. You know, we're there, we got a job to do, let's get on and do it. And research, well, you know, that's what they do in schools, you know, and we don't really need to do this when we go to the mission field. We don't have time, we're too busy, we got too much work to do. But just 1 2-hour interview, and all of this unfolded. And the team realized that there was no way that we could do this. And so they backed off right away. I mean, there was no need for me to counsel, no need for me to say anything. This interview solved the problem. They said, of course, no wonder we're not getting cooperation. You know, this is completely structurally irrelevant. And so we've got to go back and rethink our whole strategy. Now, when you look at this, I want you to learn from their mistakes, just like they want you to learn from their mistakes. You need to find out what the leadership structure is before you make decisions. You need to find out how people move ahead on working with their problems before you decide how to move ahead on yours. The obvious solution to this problem is to build your ministry on their foundation instead of building it on your foundation. But inevitably what we do is we build it on our foundation. We bring in whatever structure we have, the structure of our mission, the structure of our organization, and we then begin to do our work on the basis of that structure. We proceed as if this was the most appropriate thing to do. Sometimes it may do well. Sometimes it may work in spite of the tensions and discontinuities that occur there. But I will guarantee you that if you can build on the local structures that exist, a ministry plan and strategy, that you will be far more effective, and they will be able to work with you in a team much more rapidly than when you bring in something that's alien to their system, that has values that are in conflict, that asks them to do things which they find no rational reason to do, and you develop a plan for them to follow. It sounds ridiculous, but the truth of it is that it happens many more times than not. And as if you went around the world and you looked at church planting ministries, discipling ministries of 150 different missions, you'd find that they usually develop their ministries on the same basic plan that they brought with them wherever they came from. The same basic structure that their mission has for everything that they do. It might work. It might work in many situations, but it's usually going to create tension and frustration for the people working with it. And we don't have to be locked into it. I come back again to this whole idea that we're in prisons of disobedience, and that the purpose of the gospel is to free us from our prison, to open us up to the wonderful world that God has created, the multiplicity of people in it, and in this to be like Christ, and to be an agent of transformation, not an agent of transferal. Okay? So if you think about this, and as we work through this course, this is our objective. Our objective is to try to help you to become agents of transformation, not agents of transferal. To do that, we have research. Research is a foundation for ministry. And with that, I will close.
Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Visit biola.edu to find out how Biola could make a difference in your life.